You don't have a people problem, you have a leadership problem. That can be a hard truth to swallow, but it's one of the most important lessons any leader will ever learn. When things aren't working, when your team is underperforming, missing deadlines, lacking initiative, it's tempting to point the finger outward. It feels easier to blame laziness, lack of experience, or just not the right fit. But if those issues keep showing up again and again, the problem isn't them, it's you. Leadership is not about hiring the perfect team and waiting for magic to happen. Leadership is about taking responsibility for the results your team is or isn't producing. It's about asking yourself the hard questions. Have I been clear? Have I set expectations? Have I provided accountability? Or am I just assuming they should get it by now? A lot of leaders talk about their people like they are the issue, when in reality, no one ever clearly explained the expectations. No one ever said what excellence looks like, and then they're shocked when their team misses the mark. That's not a people problem, that's a leadership failure. When I walk into a company that's struggling, the first thing I look at is the leader, not the team, and I ask one question: what have you accepted as normal? Because whatever you've tolerated, that's what you've trained your team to do. If you allow missed deadlines, poor communication, or vague goals, that's the culture you built, not them. Leadership is not about being liked. It's about being clear. Too many leaders confuse being nice with being effective. They don't want to rock the boat, so they hold back the truth. They avoid tough conversations. They soften feedback to protect feelings, and in the process, they protect mediocrity. But the real job of a leader is to create clarity, structure, and accountability. That's how you develop high-performing people. That's how you build a winning team. Every time you avoid a leadership responsibility, whether it's giving feedback, setting expectations, or removing someone who's not a fit, you create confusion, and confused teams don't perform well. Confused teams underdeliver. And then the leader says, "I just can't find good people." No. The truth is, you didn't lead the people you had. If you want a different outcome, you have to become a different leader. That means being willing to take full ownership of every result your team creates. It means realizing that culture is not built through motivation talks or team lunches. Culture is built by what gets rewarded, what gets ignored, and what gets corrected daily. If you've got a team member who consistently misses deadlines and you keep letting it slide because they've got a lot going on, guess what? You just lowered your standard for everyone else. You taught your team that results don't matter and that deadlines are suggestions. That's not a people issue, that's your leadership. You want a team that executes with urgency, then you better be someone who communicates with urgency. You want people who are coachable, then you better be delivering coaching. You want high performance, then you better have high standards and be willing to hold the line when it gets uncomfortable, because it will get uncomfortable, but growth lives in that discomfort. Leadership is not about comfort, it's about commitment. And your team is watching what you do more than they're listening to what you say. If you tell them excellence matters, but you accept average, they'll believe what you accept. If you say accountability is a core value, but you let things slide, they'll follow your actions, not your words. Great teams don't happen by accident. They are built intentionally through daily leadership decisions, and the first step in that journey is admitting that if something's broken, you're the one holding the tools to fix it. It doesn't mean you have to have all the answers, but it does mean you stop blaming and start owning. It means you get honest about where your leadership is falling short, and then you do the work to close that gap. That's how you earn trust, that's how you drive performance, and that's how you build something that actually lasts. So no, you don't have a people problem, you have a leadership problem, and that's the best news I could give you, because now you know exactly where to start. Clarity isn't optional, it's a leadership responsibility. It's not a nice to have, a bonus skill, or something you get to focus on once everything else is in place. It's the foundation. If your team doesn't understand what success looks like, they can't deliver it. If they're guessing at what matters most, you're going to get inconsistent results. And if you're constantly frustrated that people aren't performing the way you want them to, chances are they don't actually know what you want. And that's on you. One of the biggest mistakes leaders make is assuming clarity exists just because they said something once. You gave directions in a meeting, or you sent out an email, and now you expect everyone to be on the same page. But leadership isn't about sending a message. It's about making sure the message was received, understood, and is being acted on. Clarity isn't measured by what you say. It's measured by what your team does with what you said. A lack of clarity is the silent killer of momentum. It causes people to hesitate, overthink, second, guess, and stall out. You might think your team is slow or disengaged, but often they're just confused. They don't want to make the wrong move, so they make no move at all. That's not laziness. That's fear of missing an undefined target. If people are constantly coming to you with questions like, "Is this what you wanted?" or "Am I doing this right?" That's not them being needy, that's feedback that your communication wasn't clear enough. Instead of being annoyed, treat those questions as data. If your team doesn't understand the mission, the vision, or the expectations, that's your cue to clarify, not complain. It's easy to assume people will just figure it out. It's easy to tell yourself, well, they should know this by now. But here's the reality. Clarity doesn't happen by accident. It's not the natural state of a growing organization. Things get messy, priorities shift, teams expand, projects multiply. The faster you move, the more intentional you need to be about what matters and who's responsible for what. And clarity is not just about goals, it's also about standards. What does great look like? What does done look like? What's acceptable and what isn't? Are you expecting daily updates or are weekly check-ins enough? Do you want full autonomy or do you need to review every step? If you don't answer those questions for your team, they'll fill in the blanks based on their past experiences, their comfort zones, or their best guesses, and guesswork doesn't build high-performance teams. As a leader, your job is to overcommunicate the target, not once, not casually, over and over, with consistency and intensity, and every time the target changes, you've got to reset the focus. Don't assume everyone will naturally adapt. The truth is, they're busy, they're juggling multiple priorities, and unless you are relentlessly clear about what matters most, they'll default to what's urgent instead of what's important. And here's something else: clarity is kindness. When you clearly communicate expectations, timelines, and deliverables, you give your team the chance to win. You give them a fair shot. You eliminate the guessing and the stress that comes from trying to read your mind. That's not micromanagement, that's leadership. Ambiguity creates anxiety. People start making up stories about what's going on, who's in charge, what's changing. They start protecting themselves instead of pushing forward. But clarity creates confidence. It gives people something solid to hold on to when things feel chaotic. It lets them move fast, make decisions, and deliver results without constantly looking over their shoulder. And yes, being clear takes more work up front. It takes intentionality. It takes slowing down to make sure everyone is aligned before you speed up. But that work pays dividends because the cost of unclear communication is way higher than the effort it takes to be clear in the first place. So if your team isn't producing what you need, if projects are stalling, if deadlines keep slipping, don't start with performance reviews. Start with yourself. Start with your communication. Ask, have I defined success? Have I repeated it enough times that it's impossible to miss? Have I created an environment where people know what they're doing and why it matters? Clarity isn't optional. It's not something you sprinkle on top of your leadership style. It is your leadership style. If your team isn't clear, it's because you haven't made it clear, and until you do, don't expect excellence, expect confusion. Lead with clarity, and everything else gets easier. Fail to, and everything else becomes a guessing game. High standards don't make you harsh, they make you excellent. Somewhere along the way, a dangerous idea took hold in leadership circles that holding people to a high bar is cold, unkind, or too intense. That if you expect a lot, you must not care about people. That's not just wrong, it's backwards. High standards are one of the clearest ways you show people that you do care, because if you didn't care, you wouldn't bother. You'd let things slide, you'd watch someone underdeliver and say nothing, you'd allow mediocrity to take root in your culture, and you'd pretend like that's being nice. But the truth is, lowering your standards to avoid discomfort isn't kindness, it's neglect. Great leaders don't settle. They don't allow average work to pass without a conversation. They don't ignore the gap between what was expected and what was delivered, and they don't shy away from holding the line. Not because they want to be difficult, but because they know the standard is the culture, the standard is what builds the business, and if they let it go even once, they start teaching the team that the bar doesn't matter. You have to get comfortable with the reality that excellence makes people uncomfortable. Not everyone wants to be great. Some people want to do the bare minimum, some want to blend in, some just want to coast. And when you lead with high standards, those people won't like it. They'll say you're being too demanding, that you're too tough, they'll call you extra, intense, or impossible to please. Let them. Because the people who do want to grow, they'll stay, they'll rise, they'll do the work. High standards attract high performers, and they repel those who aren't willing to meet them. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. If someone on your team misses a deadline and your response is, "No worries, I know you're busy," you just lowered the standard. If they turn in something sloppy and you tell yourself, "Well, at least they tried," you just set a new baseline. And when you keep doing that, you don't just accept mediocrity, you institutionalize it. Then one day you look around and wonder, why is no one performing at the level I need? Because you taught them the level that's allowed. High standards aren't about perfection, they're about pride, they're about precision, they're about not signing off on something that isn't excellent, even when it would be easier to just let it go, and that takes courage. Because let's be honest, calling someone out, giving tough feedback, correcting behavior, it's uncomfortable. But leadership isn't about being comfortable, it's about being committed, committed to your vision. Committed to the mission, committed to building something that actually matters. You don't do that by being everyone's best friend. You do it by being the leader they can trust to hold the standard, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, and here's the truth most leaders don't want to admit. The gap between your standards and your enforcement of those standards is where your credibility lives or dies. If you talk about excellence but accept average, your team stops believing you. They hear your words, but they follow your actions, and every time you make an exception, every time you look the other way, you're saying, "This isn't really that important." But when you lead with consistency, when you correct the small things so they don't become big things, when you praise what's excellent and coach what's not, that's when people start to believe you, that's when they rise. That's when you create a culture that actually produces results. Some leaders are so afraid of being seen as harsh that they water down every expectation. They sugarcoat feedback, avoid accountability, and hope that people will just figure it out on their own. But hope is not a leadership strategy. Clarity is, and high standards are part of that clarity. You want a forming team, set the standard, teach it, reinforce it, correct deviations from it, and do it all with empathy, but also with firmness. You can care deeply and still demand excellence. In fact, those two things should go hand in hand. High standards aren't harsh, they're the most respectful thing you can give someone who's trying to grow. They say, "I believe in you enough to expect more." They say, "You're capable of better, and I won't settle for less." That's not criticism. It's belief in action. So no, don't lower the bar to make people more comfortable. Raise it and help them rise to meet it. That's how you create excellence. That's how you build teams that win. That's how you lead. You can't develop as a leader, build a strong team, or grow a successful business without stepping into uncomfortable conversations. Conflict isn't a sign that something's broken. It's a sign that people care, that things are shifting. That tension exists between where you are and where you need to go, and that's good, because all growth happens in that gap. But too many leaders are afraid to go there. They tiptoe around issues, they soften their language, and they hope that silence will somehow fix what only truth can. Avoiding conflict doesn't protect your culture, it poisons it. Every time you ignore a behavior that's misaligned, you teach your team that integrity isn't essential. Every time you let someone slide on a deadline, on performance, on a value you claim to stand for, you widen the gap between your words and your leadership. And eventually, that gap becomes your culture, not the mission on the wall, not the speech you gave, but what you allowed to exist unchecked. Leaders avoid conflict for one reason: discomfort. They don't want to be the bad guy. They're afraid of what someone might think. They don't want to deal with the emotions, so they say nothing, or worse, they talk around it, just a few notes, no big deal. It's fine, but maybe next time. Let me be clear, that's not feedback. That's avoidance dressed up as communication. Real leadership requires candor. It requires the willingness to say the thing that might sting, but needs to be said. It means being able to look someone in the eye and say, "This isn't working," or "You're capable of more and I need to see it." That's not cruelty, that's commitment. You're not being harsh, you're being honest, and you're giving that person a chance to grow, because without friction, there is no refinement. Without pressure, there is no breakthrough. When you avoid conflict, you deny your team the opportunity to become better. You deny yourself the chance to lead at a higher level. You choose comfort over clarity, and comfort never builds greatness. One of the most powerful shifts a leader can make is to stop seeing conflict as a problem and start seeing it as a tool for alignment, for clarity, for growth. Conflict handled well is how you move faster, how you strengthen relationships, how you make sure everyone is rowing in the same direction, but only if you stop tiptoeing and start telling the truth. It starts with deciding that you care more about the mission than about momentary discomfort. You care more about someone's development than their short-term approval, and you care more about building a culture of excellence than keeping the peace at all costs, because false peace, the kind built on avoidance and pretending, is fragile. It breaks the moment pressure hits, but real peace, the kind built on truth and trust, that's strong. That's the kind of culture that can handle speed, scale, and setbacks because it's built on honesty. When you normalize conflict, when it's not some dramatic, scary lastries or thing, you create a team that doesn't panic when tension shows up. They know it's part of the process. They know it's how progress happens. And they get better at it just like anything else, but they can't get better at what you won't practice. So as a leader, you have to go first. That means you don't wait until things are on fire to speak up. You don't store frustration and unload it all at once. You speak early, you speak directly, and you speak with the intent to build, not break. You can be direct and still be kind. You can deliver hard truth and still be respectful. The point isn't to tear down, it's to make real progress, but progress only happens when truth is in the room. You will never lead a hyper-forming team without conflict. It's not a question of if it will happen. It's a question of how you handle it. Will you lean in or back out? Will you protect the standard or lower it to keep someone comfortable? Will you choose growth or avoidance? The best teams don't avoid tension. They embrace it. They have high trust, high standards, and high candor. They speak up when something's off, they handle things fast, and they respect each other enough to be honest. That's what growth looks like. So if you want to lead at the next level, stop avoiding conflict. Start using it. Let it sharpen you. Let it shape your team. Let it drive you closer to the results you actually want. Because conflict isn't the enemy, avoidance is. Growth is waiting. And it's on the other side of that hard conversation you've been putting off. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. That's not just a catchy phrase, it's a leadership truth that shapes everything in your culture. Whether you realize it or not, every time you stay silent in the face of poor behavior, missed deadlines, low effort, or broken commitments, you're not just tolerating it, you're endorsing it. You're teaching your team, your clients, your peers, this is okay. This is allowed here. As a leader, your silence is never neutral, it's instructional. People don't learn what you value by what you post on a wall or what you say in a team meeting. They learn it by what you correct and what you don't. They learn it when someone shows up late and you say nothing, when someone disrespects a teammate and you look the other way, when someone misses their target and you offer empathy instead of accountability. Over time, these little moments build a message, and that message becomes your standard. If you don't like how your team treats you, how they communicate, how they show up, how they deliver, it's time to ask what you've been tolerating. Because people don't just randomly underperform, they don't just stop caring. Most of the time, they've simply adapted to the environment you've allowed. That's the hard truth, and the good news, it means you have the power to shift it. But that starts with taking radical ownership of the culture you've created. That includes every eye roll you ignored, every deadline you let slip, every meeting you let run long because you didn't want to upset anyone. These seem small in the moment, but over time they compound. They send the message, this doesn't really matter, and here's where most leaders get stuck. They want high standards, but they also want to be liked. They want accountability, but they fear being called too much, so they compromise, they let things slide, they rewrite the narrative in their heads. They're just having a bad week. Maybe they didn't understand. It's probably not a big deal, but deep down, they know it is a big deal because now the team is watching. They're watching to see if what you said last week in that team meeting about operating with excellence actually means something. Or if it was just a motivational moment with no backbone. You are always setting the tone. If you respond with silence, you're telling your team this is acceptable here. If you respond with correction, you're telling your team this matters. And if you're not willing to have that uncomfortable conversation, you're sending a louder message than you realize. This applies not just to what others do, but how they treat you. If you allow constant interruptions, disrespect, or disregard, you're teaching people that your time and your leadership are negotiable. But the truth is, you don't get what you expect, you get what you accept. And whatever you allow, you're reinforcing. This doesn't mean you have to lead with an iron fist. It means you lead with clarity, clarity about what's acceptable, clarity about how communication happens, clarity about what it looks like to treat each other with respect, show up prepared, and deliver results that meet the bar. That clarity creates alignment, and when people are aligned, they're empowered. Because they know exactly where the guardrails are, they know where the line is, and what happens when it's crossed. And yes, setting these boundaries may upset some people. Some may resist, some may say, you've changed, let them. Because they're right, you are changing. You're evolving into the leader who doesn't tolerate dysfunction just to keep the peace. You're stepping into the version of yourself that prioritizes progress over popularity, that protects the standard instead of people's temporary comfort. This is how great leaders build trust, not by being passive, but by being consistent, by reinforcing what's important, by making sure the culture aligns with the vision, not just occasionally, but relentlessly. Because excellence is never an accident, it's the result of consistent behavior, reinforced by leadership that doesn't flinch. So if you want to raise the bar, stop asking for permission to enforce it. Lead, speak up, correct in love but with firmness, and when people cross a line, don't just hope it gets better, fix it, because every time you tolerate what's beneath your standard, you move further from the culture you're trying to build. Remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. Raise the bar and watch who rises with it.